I'm a parish nurse out of my church in California. So I have a big interest in mental health because I have an adult son with a serious mental illness. So I was thinking a few years ago, how can I get something started at my church? And so I started with a book study. And we read a book and we discussed it. And we had a lot of things going. And one thing we did is offer a mental health first aid course. Have you heard about that? Mental Health First Aid is a national organization. It's an 8-hour course. It's nothing to do with the church. They equate it to, if you have learned CPR and you see somebody collapsed, you do CPR. Mental Health First Aid gives some simple tools for anybody to take if they see someone who they think is having a mental health crisis. And it goes through education about some broad categories of mental illness. It's a really good program. It's free. And so we did that at church one day. And a little bit after that, the moderator came up and said, well, I really like that, but what are we going to do when things happen in the service? We live in a place where sometimes we have people coming off the street who are acting in certain ways, or our own members. So mental health first aid was good for some general issues, but we felt we wanted some more. So I had remembered many years, well, it was actually in 2012, I went to a UCC Widening the Welcome conference, and the opening session was by a person named Craig Rennebohm. I remember it to this day. He gave a 1-hour presentation about companionship, and I thought, companionship is the one thing we need. There's many things we need, but one added educational thing or tool we can use for our own members. So Craig came out to our congregation in January and gave us this, it was an 8-hour training. And I want to let you know about this book. If any of you are interested in more, this is just a little taste of companionship. It's in the back of your handout. This is his book, The Way of Companionship, Welcoming the Stranger. And the things Johari, the presentation she gave, is basically what's in this book. The book that he also wrote is called Souls in the Hand of a Tender God, Stories of the Search for Home and Healing on the Streets. He was a mental health chaplain in Seattle for 25 years, and that's where this program came out of. So we had the training in January, and we had a lot of people there. I invited different churches, and the way I advertised it was, what do churches do when a mental health issue arises on Sunday? Because we're concerned about elsewhere, but I think churches are concerned what's happening right here. I know in my church, when something happens, everybody's looking at everybody else. I don't know what the ministers think in the front, but I think they're probably a little bit concerned if something goes on in the congregation. So what tools can we learn, and how can we get a little bit organized about addressing these issues? So then, before we had the training, or soon after, I can't remember, I'm going to tell you an incident that happened in my church. It's a fairly large church with a central aisle. So right during the sermon, a man came in with some bags and kind of disheveled, which was fine, and he walked right down the middle and sat in the front pew. Everyone saw him. The sermon continued, and he started rustling around his papers, but he was quiet, and I was sitting just kind of like off to the side. People were looking at me. People were looking at him. After about 5 minutes, he stood up. The sermon's still going on. He picked up his bags, and he just kind of looked around with this worried look on his face. So I took it on myself to stand up and walk right over to him and welcomed him, and I asked him if he'd like to come out with me and have some coffee and food out back. And he said, okay. So we walked out together, and I saw a look of relief on the usher's face when I walked out, because our ushers are great, but they really don't know how to address stuff like this. So the thing about companionship, there's some good tools, as Johari was saying, but what I felt even more so is for people, and myself, within our own church. We have people who come to church and run out the back before, right at the last hymn. We have people, sometimes it's me, who go to the socializing hour or the coffee hour, and they're there, but their body language and their way they're looking, people do not approach them. And they could be visitors, but they're often people who've been coming for some time. And supposedly the church is a welcoming place. They get handshaked. They're handshaked. But often it doesn't go beyond that. So what companionship gives you is some tools. If you're willing to take the step. The thing about a companion is you see them, you see somebody who's in pain or somebody who's isolated, and you have to decide, do I want to approach? And that's the word that I remembered from companionship. It's the companion deciding to approach that person. That can be a little bit nerve-wracking. And if you don't feel like doing it, you don't do it. One thing that was on the slide is it's always done in public. The companion does not approach this person and say, come into my private office, or come into my car and I will take you someplace. If it's not in public, it's not companionship. Some people might think, well, this doesn't really do much. The word that comes to mind about companionship, it's very humble. It's not psychotherapy. It's not analysis. You're not a psychiatrist. You're a person who's making the step to approach somebody who it seems like they might benefit from it. And the practices of companionship, like hospitality. Would you like some food? Would you like some coffee? Those actually go a long way. Craig gave this great example in the presentation. He was working with people on the street. He would see this woman over across the corner who had her bags, and she had this habit of walking across the busy intersection in the light and going from side to side. And his work was to interact and try to get people into service. And for a long time, he would cross when she was, and she never looked up. This went on, it wasn't like every day, but this went on for some time. One day, he was walking, and she looked up at him, and he smiled and said hello. And that was the beginning of this relationship. So it might start just like that. So what we're doing at my church after this training, we had a lot of people interested, and we've started a companionship team. Now, we did get the training, and many of us have read this book, but some of these skills don't come naturally, or they need practice. So we are carefully moving forward, since we're meeting once a month, on practicing some hospitality, on practicing some situations, on practicing the listening skills. And our goal is to have a Sunday morning companionship group. So me and somebody else might be assigned the first Sundays. So our intention is to be there from the very beginning to the very end. And just sort of keep our eye out. And the ushers would know who we are, and we're not going to wear badges, we're just a church member. And when we see something, to be willing, if we feel called, to approach them. And of course, we're all trying to learn those skills where we can approach somebody who seems isolated or sad, to ask them, can I sit with you? Can we walk down the cloister? So I'm wondering, we're going to do a few scenarios. Before we do that, I'm wondering why you three chose to come here and how any of this resonates with you. You know, the whole training was a 3-hour thing. This is just a snippet. But it's some basic communication skills. And so I'm wondering if you have any comment or reason why you came or anything like that.
We've had the same situation that you talked about with a stranger coming in twice just recently. And it happened both times. Apparently it was handled by, of course it was a Sunday when we weren't there, but somebody who really knew what they were doing and offered coffee and to take them out and really handled it very well. But the first time it happened, it even had the ministers up front scared because they thought there was a gun probably in the
Yeah. So these people, you weren't there, but they approached the person.
So such a skill would be useful.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate part of the conversation. I think my sense of fear about doing the approach is I go through this whole thing that I'm going to be having dinner with this person
No.
for the rest of my life.
No. Being a companion does not mean, you might be their friend later. If you're approaching them as a companion, it is not signing up to be their friend for life. I understand that. It's a little bit, that's a big deal. It's a little bit on the surface. I mean, it's not deep. But for many people who are going through a mental health issue or are isolated, that little humble step of welcome, a little bit more than shaking the hand, can mean a lot. Because some folks haven't had that for a long time. And if we can't do it at church, where can you do it? Our church eventually wants to go out, but no time soon. We're trying to get these skills. You don't have to have, be on a companionship team to be willing to approach the person after service who is standing by themselves. But it's your decision to approach. Oh, and one thing Craig does say, just to go back to that nervousness feeling about the friend, being a friend for life, if you feel any, not that so much, but any sense of danger or really unease, there's no need to do anything. So you have to kind of be able to read what your own reaction is. Yeah. So.
We've started a mental health ministry in our church, and so part of it is this companion role.
Yeah.
And how we do it. Now, it's just not approaching them, it's really beyond that next step that you brought up. So that's what we're trying to learn. And the one other thing I wanted to say, we have a Stephen ministry in the church, and that's their job, if you will, to be a companion for someone in need. Haven't necessarily targeted mental health, and so this was the issue that we're discussing of, well, who's going to be that companion? Is it the mental health ministry team, or is it Stephen's ministry? And we're working that out with Stephen's ministry to support Stephen's ministry. So if they need some additional help, let's say with professional to help them, we even got into a situation where you need to say have boundaries. And Stephen's ministry, they're trained to say, I'm going to, if the person is willing to have you as a companion, so you've had one or two conversations already, that I'm going to work with you for the next 2 weeks while you get therapy or you straighten out whatever the situation is. And so they agree to that. So you have that framework up front so they don't have that expectations. Sometimes, however, they say that will continue because that person wants you as their companion on an ongoing basis.
Right.
That becomes a difficult thing. So what we're also working on is our professionals also helped the companion to work with that person and how to deal with that so it doesn't become a lifelong situation.
Do you call them companions? Or
just in that general concept of
Yeah.
companion. Yes.
Yeah. I know in Craig's model, it is not an ongoing thing. Now he personally, when he was chaplain on the homeless, he would, and especially particularly in this book, he has a lot of stories of, longer relationships. My vision of companionship at the church level on the Sunday morning, it is not that. You know, it might be that because you approach somebody one Sunday, you can approach them again. I mean, there's no reason not to. But companions, at least the way it's going to be, at least in our church, I'm not assigned to somebody. You know, I'm just keeping my eyes open for the situation which somebody walks in off the street, but that's not that common. I mean, people can walk in off the street. If this man didn't stand up and look around, I wouldn't have done anything. But it's more for, when I started mental health ministry, somebody suggested we read this book. I love this book. But in this book, the mentally ill or those having problems is the other. They're outside our doors. To me, we should start in what we got of our own group. We've got our own problems. And so to me, this is more focused on, you don't have to be a member, but are you here on Sunday? And do I, just because I'm a regular person, do I see something that kind of makes me think you might feel, I don't know, ill at ease or having a problem or something, and am I willing to take a step?
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
I would say before even that step, if you've decided that you want to try to pursue companionship, then in your mind, you're actually checking things out. You're paying attention now. Maybe before you went to church, you sat down, you enjoyed the service, you enjoyed the friends that you had, and you left. But when you make the decision in yourself that you're going to be a companion, then you also make the decision, I'm going to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And now I noticed that gentleman in the back. I noticed him before, but now I really noticed something's going on with him. And now you get to choose, am I going to approach or not? But I think it starts with a level of sensitivity that you've decided to take on this role and just pay attention. Because the suffering is there, the pain is there, but so many people don't even notice it.
Well, I'm a student minister in our church, and I think we are too centered on when somebody's referred to us, rather than just getting up on Sunday morning and going through this. So I like it, and I think I'll take it back.
Good.
On the back where it lists, let me have this for a second. Craig's companionship program is actually under an umbrella of an organization called Pathways to Promise.
Yeah.
That's right up here at the top. That is in St. Louis, and it's been around for a long time. It's a group of a lot of different denominations whose goal is to work around mental health in church congregations. And so one of the programs that's under Pathways to Promise is companionship. So if you want to know more about companionship, I think what they're doing is they are trying to put together some videos that churches can use about companionship. This is the place to contact. Because when Craig was out at our church in January, they were filming it of him. So using some of that presentation to make some tools. And so I'm not sure if they're up yet. But if you're interested, and this book that's listed, this is an easy to read book. And I went and I purchased this for people in my church, and they're passing it around so they can get a little more sense of what this ministry is like.
I'll add that we've purchased the books.
Yeah.
And then gone online with Pathways, and I would recommend anybody that's
So you found
working
them,
on
yeah.
mental health ministry, that it is helpful.
Because there's other
Ideas
books.
and
Yeah.
guides, because we had questions about what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, and it gives you some good
They
guidelines.
really, because the other one is mental health ministry and introduction, and organizing a congregational mental health team.
That was a very good.
That was good, to get some structure.
Right.
Yeah. Why don't we try one scenario, okay? Is anybody game?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, we are.
Enthusiasm.
Okay, this is a very easy one. So is anybody willing to be the The companion? Okay. I'm going to read it what it is, and then I'll be the church member and you can be the companion. Okay. During coffee hour, a person is standing by himself. We've already talked about this. Sipping coffee. He's standing stiffly, looking around self-consciously, at other times looking down. He often comes to coffee hour, but because of his body language, standing separate from others, people don't approach him. I see that all the time. What would you do? Okay, so I'm here.
So you need a refill on your coffee?
Well, yeah.
Oh, good. Well, let's go get another cup.
Oh, okay.
You come with me.
I love it.
That's pretty good.
That was very good.
For a rookie. You didn't need this class.
Okay, so here's another one. Who wants to help? You-
I want to just point out.
Yeah, though that was
notice
great.
His face
His face was great.
with her, in relationship to her. He didn't get too close, and he kept a distance, yet it was, in a way, close enough that if he wanted to, he could lower his voice and talk to her, but not within her space. Spacing is really important.
Actually, you brought up something.
It was good.
In CIT, crisis intervention training, they go through with someone with mental health issues, how you
Police
approach them.
officers.
Yeah, police officers, what they're trained to do, and I've seen a video on this where there was a young man who was having real problems and he didn't want to get close, and he would be talking to the young man, but every once in a while intervening, can I take a step closer?
Oh,
And he got up to where it was human to human then, it was a little closer then, and that's where they really broke through. So
but he brought it in slowly.
slowly brought it
Yeah,
in.
that's a great idea. All right, do you want to be the companion, or would one of you? Okay,
He's gonna do it.
all right. So the scenario is, it's going to be me. A church member always sits in the back pew by herself. She arrives just in time for the opening anthem. During the time of greeting one another during the service, she doesn't stand up, rather keeps her eyes on the order of worship. After church, she always leaves during the closing hymn and slips out the back door. You have been noticing this for a few months. One Sunday, you happen to be in the back foyer at the end of worship, and she is leaving, ready to exit the building. This time she sees you and makes eye contact. What would you do? So the final hymn is playing and I've gotten up and I'm leaving.
Good morning.
Oh.
I've noticed you here before. Is there anything that you need to help your worship service be better for you?
I don't know what to say. But next week you can make another step because she looked you in the eye and you said something. It's just that little step that's not like a deep conversation. You're not being the psychologist or the psychiatrist. You know, it is on the surface and it's humble, but it is not nothing, you know.
You just acknowledged
Right.
she was a human being.
Yeah.
You just acknowledged that she mattered. You just acknowledged she exists. It's not, you're not invisible. We see you.
Let's just think of something. There was an example of this at the training we did with Craig. Just think of what might you approach someone and say if you saw someone sitting silently, sad, staring, and not communicating. They're just kind of like this. I'm wondering what we could think of in approaching that person. I'm thinking of what you said right here, is, I'm glad you're here today. Can I do something for you? Of course, if the person doesn't want you, you're going to read the cues and exit. It's not grabbing them into coffee hour to talk to anybody, but it's making an initial step there. And it can mean a lot. And if you do it once, maybe you'll do it again. So it's a purposeful attention to approach. And I had read this book before, but then that word of approach, you're willing to take a step. And it's pretty profound. It is welcoming the stranger.